Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast, and let's wrap up week 14 with Silmarillion Saturday. Now, Saturdays are our chance to revisit the history and legends of the Elder Days, whether from the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, or more. Last week, we began a close look at one of the most unique and, I think, underappreciated peoples of Middle-earth, the Druedain. We talked about their physical appearance and traits, their connection with the folk of Haleth, the Haladin, their implacable hatred of the Orcs, and their unique skill set that included lifelike sculpture and their ability to sit still like those sculptures for a very long time. We even heard a story about a woodsman confusing a Drúg with the crafted statue. Well, today we're going to hear another story about the Druedain. This one's called The Faithful Stone, and we'll get to it early in this week's Silmarillion Saturday. It is said that the Druedain would often sit thus in times of grief or loss, but sometimes for pleasure in thought, or in the making of plans. But they could also use this stillness when on guard, and then they would sit or stand hidden in shadow, and though their eyes might seem closed, or staring with a blank gaze, nothing passed or came near that was not marked and remembered. So intense was their unseen vigilance that it could be felt as a hostile menace by intruders, who retreated in fear before any warning was given. But if any evil thing passed on, then they would utter as a signal a shrill whistle, painful to endure close at hand, and heard far off. The service of the Druedain as guards was much esteemed by the folk of Haleth in times of peril, and if such guards were not to be had, they would have figures carved in their likeness to set near their houses, believing that, being made by the Druedain themselves for the purpose, they would hold some of the menace of the living men. Indeed, though they held the Druedain in love and trust, many of the folk of Haleth believed that they possessed uncanny and magical powers, and among their tales of marvels, there were several that told of such things. One of these is recorded here. The Faithful Stone. On a time there was a Drúg named Aghan, well known as a leech. He had a great friendship with Barak, a forester of the folk, who lived in a house in the woods 2 miles or more from the nearest village. The dwellings of Aghan's family were nearer, and he spent most of his time with Barak and his wife, and was much loved by their children. There came a time of trouble, for a number of daring orcs had secretly entered the woods nearby, and were scattered in 2s and 3s, waylaying any that went abroad alone, and at night attacking houses far from neighbors. The household of Barak were not much afraid, for Aghan stayed with them at night and kept watch outside. But one morning he came to Barak and said, "Friend, I have ill news from my kin, and I fear I must leave you a while. My brother has been wounded, and he lies now in pain and calls for me, since I have skill in treating orc wounds. I will return as soon as I may." Barak was greatly troubled, and his wife and children wept, but Aghan said, "I will do what I can. I have had a watchstone brought here and set near your house." Barak went out with Aghan and looked at the watchstone. It was large and heavy and sat under some bushes not far from his doors. Aghan laid his hand upon it, and after a silence said, "See, I have left it with some of my powers. May it keep you from harm." Nothing untoward happened for 2 nights, but on the 3rd night Barak heard the shrill warning call of the Drúgs, or dreamed that he heard it, for it roused no one else. Leaving his bed, he took his bow from the wall and went to a narrow window, and he saw 2 orcs setting fuel against his house and preparing to kindle it. Then Barak was shaken with fear, for marauding orcs carried with them brimstone or some other devilish stuff that was quickly inflamed and not quenched with water. Recovering himself, he bent his bow, but at that moment, just as the flames leapt up, he saw a Drúg come running up behind the orcs. One he felled with a blow of his fist, and the other fled. Then he plunged barefoot into the fire, scattering the burning fuel and stamping on the orc flames that ran along the ground. Barak made for the doors, but when he had unbarred them and sprang out, the Drúg had disappeared. There was no sign of the smitten orc. The fire was dead, and there remained only a smoke and a stench. Barak went back indoors to comfort his family, who had been roused by the noises and the burning reek. But when it was daylight, he went out again and looked about. He found that the watchstone had gone, but he kept that to himself. "Tonight I must be the watchman," he thought. But later in the day, Aghan came back and was welcomed with joy. He was wearing high buskins, such as the Drúg sometimes wore in hard country, among thorns or rocks, and he was weary. But he was smiling and seemed pleased. And he said, "I bring good news. My brother is no longer in pain and will not die, for I came in time to withstand the venom. And now I learned that the marauders have been slain or else fled. How have you fared?" "We are still alive," said Barak. "But come with me, and I will show you and tell you more." Then he led Aghan to the place of the fire and told him of the attack in the night. "The watchstone has gone. Orc work, I guess. What have you to say to that?" "I will speak when I have looked and thought longer," said Aghan. And then he went hither and thither, scanning the ground, and Barak followed him. At length, Aghan led him to a thicket at the edge of the clearing in which the house stood. There the watchstone was, sitting on a dead orc, but its legs were all blackened and cracked, and one of its feet had split off and lay loose at its side. Aghan looked grieved, but he said, "Oh well, he did what he could, and better that his legs should trample orc fire than mine." Then he sat down and unlaced his buskins, and Barak saw that under them there were bandages on his legs. Aghan undid them. "They are healing already," he said. "I had kept vigil by my brother for 2 nights, and last night I slept. I woke before morning came, and I was in pain, and found my legs blistered. Then I guessed what had happened. Alas, if some power passes from you to a thing that you have made, then you must take a share in its hurts." This story is such an interesting and moving story. I mean, Aghan knew quite well what passing his power to the watchstone would mean. He took a personal risk upon himself for his good friend and his family. It's also an intriguing insight into the notion of power passing from you to a thing. I mean, certainly when Sauron put all his power into the ring, then the share of its hurts that he took was complete. I also thought it was interesting to see that orcs carry this fire, similar maybe in some ways to the explosive stuff that we see used in Helm's Deep. Anyway, that wraps it up for today's Silmarillion Saturday. Come back for more of the Elder Days every Saturday as we open up the pages of Middle-earth history. And if there is a first or second age story you want to hear me read and discuss, please let me know by emailing barnaman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout, a bonus weekly episode, and a lot more. Finally, join me again next Monday as we start week 15 of today's Tolkien Times with Mailbag Monday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.